Let me start by saying that in sharing this story, I've chosen to use names that aren't the real ones involved. They're just placeholders to make it easier for you to follow along while protecting the privacy of those who went through this ordeal. The events I'm about to recount are based on actual reports from church investigations and accounts I've come across in my work as an exorcist. They're a reminder of how evil can linger in the most ordinary places and how faith in Christ is our ultimate shield against it. This particular case unfolded back in the late 1980s and early 1990s down in West Palm Beach, Florida, a coastal town with its mix of sunny beaches, modest neighborhoods, and a growing community of immigrants from places like Colombia. It's the kind of area where folks come looking for a fresh start, away from the troubles of their homeland. But sometimes those troubles or worse follow them in ways they never expect. Picture a family we'll call the Moralises. The father, Carlos, was a hard-working construction worker in his mid-40s, originally from Colombia, where he'd known the grind of manual labor all his life. He was a man of deep Catholic faith, the kind who started and ended his days with prayer, trusting in God's providence even when times were tough. His wife, Isabella, was a few years younger, around 40, and she took whatever job she could find, like stocking shelves at a local grocery store. They had 2 daughters. The older one, Sophia, who was just turning 18 and had that fiery, protective spirit typical of big sisters, and the younger, Gina, 16 years old, a shy high school student at Palm Beach Gardens High School. Gina was the quiet type, more comfortable with her books and dreams than with crowds, but she had a gentle heart. They'd immigrated to the United States seeking better opportunities, escaping the violence and instability back home. In 1990, they found what seemed like a steal, a small apartment on Olive Avenue, in one of those low-rise buildings that dotted the immigrant enclaves. It was affordable, which was crucial because money was tight. Carlos worked long hours under the Florida sun, hammering nails and laying bricks, while Isabella managed the household on a shoestring budget. The girls shared a bedroom, and life, at first, felt like it was settling into a rhythm of normalcy. They attended Mass on Sundays, said grace before meals, and tried to build a new life. But what they didn't know, and how could they, was that this apartment carried a dark history, one steeped in evil that went beyond human wrongdoing. The previous occupant had been a man named Victor Ramirez, a Colombian immigrant himself, but one who'd taken a very different path. Victor was in his 30s when he lived there in the 1980s, involved in the drug trade that plagued parts of Florida back then. He wasn't just a dealer, he delved into something far more sinister. Victor practiced a twisted form of Santeria, mixed with black magic rituals he'd picked up from old Caribbean and African legends. Santeria itself has roots in Yoruba traditions blended with Catholicism, but Victor corrupted it, using it for personal gain and vengeance. You see, in his desperation to climb the ranks in the drug world, Victor turned to summoning spirits, not the holy ones we invoke in prayer, but demonic entities. He believed he could harness their power to eliminate rivals and protect his operations. Through blood sacrifices and incantations drawn from forbidden texts, he called upon 2 ancient demons, known in those folklore traditions as Zion and Minga. These weren't just made-up names. They appeared in old accounts from the Caribbean and parts of Africa, tied to stories of revenge and manipulation. Zion, as the legends go, had its origins in the brutal days of slavery in Haiti during the 18th century. It was said to be the spirit of a fallen slave who, after enduring unimaginable torture, cursed his masters and sparked a bloody uprising that claimed hundreds of lives. In death, this spirit twisted into a demon, wandering the earth to possess the weak and sow chaos wherever it went. It fed on anger and rebellion, turning people against each other in fits of rage. Minga, often described as Zion's sister in these dark tales, was a female entity specializing in manipulating women. Her backstory traced back to 19th century Colombia, where she was blamed for outbreaks of madness in rural villages, driving women to self-harm and spreading plagues through whispered lies and despair. Victor, in his arrogance, thought he could control them. He performed a ritual in the apartment's living room, sacrificing blood perhaps from animals, or worse, to bind them to his will. For a time, it seemed to work. His drug deals prospered, and enemies vanished. But demons don't serve humans, they use them. In 1988, the entities turned on him. Possessed by their fury, Victor set himself ablaze right there in the room, his body charring to a crisp before anyone could intervene. The fire department ruled it a suicide, but those who knew whispered of something unnatural, the way the flames seemed to dance with purpose, and the lingering symbols etched in dried blood on the walls. When the Morales family moved in, the apartment had been cleaned up, but not truly cleansed. Traces remained, faint markings hidden under fresh paint, and a small, cracked statue tucked away in a closet, perhaps overlooked by the previous cleaners. It was one of those eerie figures from Santeria altars, but warped with eyes that seemed to follow you. The family noticed the low rent and shrugged off any odd feelings as just the quirks of an old building. Carlos, with his strong faith, blessed the place with holy water upon arrival, reciting prayers from his worn Bible. But evil like this doesn't flee easily. It waits for an opening. That opening came innocently enough. Isabella, while unpacking boxes one afternoon, stumbled upon the statue. She was a good woman, but her past in Colombia had left scars of abuse from her early years that she'd buried deep. Curiosity got the better of her. She picked it up, dusted it off, and felt a strange chill run through her. From that moment, the demons had a foothold. Zion and Minga, dormant but not gone, sensed vulnerability. They didn't strike all at once. That's not how evil often works. It creeps in, subtle at first, testing the waters. The first signs appeared in early 1991, starting with Gina. She was the most sensitive of the family, prone to daydreams and quiet reflection. One night, as she lay in bed, she heard whispers, soft voices, in archaic Spanish, murmuring names, Zion, Minga. At first, she dismissed them as echoes from the street or her imagination, perhaps stress from school exams, but the whispers grew clearer, weaving tales of old horrors. They spoke of Zion's rage in the Haitian fields, how it had led slaves to slaughter their oppressors in a night of blood and fire. Minga chimed in with stories of Colombian villages where women, under her influence, threw themselves into rivers or clawed at their own flesh during feverish plagues. Gina confided in Sophia, who laughed it off as teenage nonsense. "You're just hearing the neighbors arguing," Sophia said, always the practical one. But then objects began to move. A mirror cracked without cause, spilling shards across the bathroom floor. Lights flickered in patterns that defied faulty wiring, and an acrid smell of smoke lingered in the air, like something burning from within the walls. Carlos took Gina to the doctor, thinking it might be migraines or anxiety, but tests came back normal. Isabella, ever the nurturing mother, prayed extra hard, lighting candles to the Virgin Mary. Yet, in her worry, she unknowingly worsened things. One evening, examining the statue again, she read aloud an inscription carved into its base, a curse in disguised Latin, invoking the very entities that had claimed Victor. That's when the possession truly began to take hold. Zion, the vengeful one, targeted Gina first, drawn to her innocence. During a family dinner, she suddenly seized up, her voice dropping to a guttural tone that wasn't hers. "I am Zion, the Avenger." The family froze, thinking it a joke or a fit. But as the weeks passed, the episodes intensified. Gina would recount, in that alien voice, details of Victor's rituals, how he'd spilled the blood of a young woman to summon them, trading her life for power in his illicit trades, and how, in betrayal, they'd forced him to ignite himself, his screams echoing as his flesh melted away. Sophia, seeing her sister's torment, shifted from skepticism to fear. She tried to protect Gina, staying up nights to watch over her. But the demons were cunning. They began to influence Sophia too, planting seeds of aggression. One day, in a fit she couldn't explain, Sophia lashed out, bruising Gina's arm in a grip too strong for her own strength. Carlos, desperate, turned to the church, but at this stage, they still hoped it was medical. Isabella felt the weight most heavily, her own past traumas resurfacing in nightmares where she saw Victor's charred form reaching out. As an exorcist, I've seen how these entities operate. They exploit cracks in our spiritual armor, starting small to build terror. In this case, the apartment wasn't just haunted, it was a portal left open by Victor's folly. The Morales family, good people at heart, were caught in a web of ancient evil, one that would soon escalate beyond whispers and shadows. But remember, even in the darkest moments, Christ's light can pierce through. This story shows that, though the path was painful, I recall reading these details in archived church reports shared among exorcists to learn from. The backstory of Zion and Minga aligns with Vatican records on demonic hierarchies, entities that thrive on human suffering, mimicking folklore to hide their true infernal nature. They aren't ghosts or spirits. They're fallen angels, rebels against God, seeking to drag souls into despair. As the months wore on, the family's daily life unraveled. Carlos noticed cold spots in the living room where Victor had died, and Isabella began experiencing migraines that felt like something clawing inside her skull. Gina's schoolwork suffered. She'd stare blankly during class, muttering phrases in old dialects she couldn't have known. Teachers called home, concerned about her behavior. One particularly chilling incident happened on a rainy evening. The power went out, and in the candlelight, the blood symbols from Victor's rituals faintly reappeared on the walls, as if bleeding through the paint. Isabella screamed, recognizing them from her childhood stories of brujeria witchcraft in Colombia. Carlos grabbed his rosary, leading the family in prayer, but the whispers mocked them, laughing in dual voices, one deep and furious, the other sly and feminine. This was just the beginning, the subtle invasion that demons use to weaken resolve. They reveal their histories piecemeal to terrify and confuse, making victims doubt their sanity. Zion boasted of its role in historical uprisings, claiming credit for chaos that historians attribute to human folly. Minga whispered of manipulating generations of women, turning love into poison and hope into suicide. In my experience, such revelations are tactics to instill fear, but they also expose the demon's pride, a weakness we exploit in exorcisms. For the Moraleses, though, awareness came too late. By mid-1991, the possession had deepened, leading to physical manifestations that no doctor could explain. But let's not jump ahead. The key here is understanding the origin. Evil doesn't arise in a vacuum. Victor's choices invited it, and the family's innocence made them targets. Yet, God's grace was already at work through Carlos's faith, setting the stage for intervention. As I continue this account, keep in mind that these events, while extraordinary, are real battles in the spiritual war we all face. The names may be changed, but the lessons remain. Stay vigilant, cling to Christ, and never underestimate the power of prayer. As the whispers grew more insistent in Gina's ears, the family's fragile sense of peace began to crack like that old mirror in the bathroom. It was subtle at first, the way evil often is, testing boundaries, probing for weaknesses before unleashing its full fury. Gina, that sweet 16-year-old with her nose always in a book, started waking up in cold sweats, convinced she was hearing voices from the walls themselves. They'd murmur in an archaic form of Spanish laced with accents she couldn't place, repeating those names, Zion and Minga, over and over, like a broken record from some forgotten era. She'd tell me, if she were here recounting it, how the voices didn't just name themselves, they spun tales, bit by bit, as if savoring the reveal. Zion's story came in fragments. A slave in 18th century Haiti, chained and whipped under the brutal sun, his spirit breaking until it snapped into something vengeful. He cursed his masters, the voices said, igniting a revolt that turned sugarcane fields into slaughter grounds, blood soaking the earth as hundreds fell to machetes and fire. It wasn't history from a textbook. It felt personal, like Zion was bragging through her, promising the same chaos for anyone who stood in its way. Minga's whispers were softer, more insidious, speaking of 19th century Colombian villages where she slithered into women's minds, turning whispers of doubt into epidemics of despair. Whole communities ravaged by self-inflicted wounds, plagues that started with one fevered soul and spread like wildfire, all because she delighted in breaking the fragile. Gina tried to shake it off, blaming the stress of high school algebra tests, fitting in with kids who didn't understand her immigrant roots. But then the physical signs started, the ones that make you question reality. Objects shifting on their own, a family photo frame sliding across the nightstand in the dead of night, crashing to the floor with a sound that echoed too loudly for its size. Lights flickering not from bad bulbs, but in rhythmic patterns, like Morse code from the beyond. And that smell, acrid, charred flesh mixed with sulfur wafting through the vents, strongest in the living room where Victor had met his end. It wasn't constant, it came in waves, just enough to unsettle, to make them wonder if the building's wiring was faulty or if the neighbors were burning trash. Sophia, ever the tough older sister, dismissed it at first. "You're imagining things, Gina," she'd say with a roll of her eyes, pulling her sibling into a hug that was meant to reassure but carried a hint of her own unease. Sophia was the one who handled the practical stuff, helping with homework, standing up to bullies at school. But even she couldn't ignore it when Gina's episodes escalated. One evening, during what should have been a quiet family meal, rice and beans on the table, Carlos saying grace, Gina's body went rigid. Her eyes rolled back, and from her throat came a voice that wasn't hers, deep, gravelly, like a man's who'd smoked a lifetime of cigars. "I am Zion, the Avenger," it growled, sending chills down their spines. The fork clattered from her hand, and for a moment, the room felt heavier, the air thick with an unseen presence. Carlos, bless his soul, was a man of action rooted in faith. He didn't panic. Instead, he crossed himself and insisted on taking Gina to the hospital. They drove to Miami Children's Hospital, about an hour south, under the palm-lined highways, where doctors in white coats poked and prodded. Scans, blood tests, even a psychiatrist's evaluation, they diagnosed it as some form of schizophrenia or epileptic seizures triggered by stress. "Teenage brains can play tricks," one doctor said, prescribing pills that dulled Gina's edges but didn't silence the voices. No abnormalities showed up on the MRIs, no tumors or imbalances. It was all in her head, they claimed, but Carlos knew better. His Catholic upbringing in Colombia had taught him about the spiritual realm, the battles unseen. Still, he hoped medicine would fix it, not wanting to jump to darker conclusions. Isabella, meanwhile, poured her heart into prayer. She'd kneel by Gina's bed each night, rosary beads clicking through her fingers, invoking saints and the Blessed Mother for protection. But in her desperation, she made a fateful mistake. That cracked statue from the closet, she'd kept it, thinking it a harmless relic, perhaps even a religious icon twisted by time. One sleepless night, with Gina tossing in feverish dreams, Isabella held it close and whispered words etched on its base, words she thought were a prayer, but were actually an incantation, a remnant of Victor's rituals. It was like unlocking a door she'd already cracked open, inviting the demons deeper. That's when Zion truly manifested through Gina, using her as a vessel to taunt the family. In the middle of a stormy Florida night, thunder rumbling like distant artillery, Gina sat bolt upright in bed, her voice booming unnaturally. "I was summoned by Victor Ramirez, that fool who traded blood for power." The details poured out, horrifying in their clarity. Victor had sacrificed a young girl, the voice claimed. Her life essence spilled on the apartment floor to bind Zion and Minga to his drug empire. For a while, they'd granted him success, rivals vanishing, shipments gliding through customs like ghosts. But loyalty isn't in a demon's nature. They turned, forcing Victor to douse himself in gasoline and strike the match. His body writhing as flames consumed him, leaving a blackened husk where the coffee table now stood. Gina, or whatever spoke through her, laughed, a sound that echoed wrong, too hollow for a girl's lungs. The evil spread like ink and water. Sophia, who had been Gina's rock, started changing, subtle at first, irritability, snapping at her parents over small things. Then came the violence. One afternoon, while helping Gina dress after a bath, Sophia's grip tightened on her sister's arm, bruising the skin in purple welts. She claimed she didn't remember that her hand had moved on its own. But deep down, Minga was at work, the manipulator, planting seeds of rage in the protective sister, turning love into a weapon. Carlos bandaged the arm, his hands shaking, while Isabella wept, sensing the family's unity fraying. In my years as an exorcist, appointed by the Archbishop of Indianapolis back in 2005, I've encountered similar patterns. Demons don't charge in with horns blazing, they erode from within, using our own fears and flaws against us. Zion and Minga were masters of this, drawing from their twisted lore to personalize the torment. Zion fed on the family's immigrant struggles, whispering of unjust masters and deserved revenge, while Minga targeted the women, amplifying Isabella's old traumas and Gina's insecurities. It was a calculated invasion, building towards something more terrifying. The hospital visits became routine, but the pills only masked symptoms. Gina's grades plummeted. She'd doodle strange symbols in her notebooks, circles with inverted crosses, runes that matched those hidden on the walls. Neighbors complained of noises from the apartment, banging, muffled screams at odd hours. Carlos even called a plumber, thinking pipes were the culprit. But the man fled after feeling an icy hand on his shoulder in the empty living room. One pivotal night stands out in the reports. The family gathered for prayer, Carlos leading with his Bible open to Psalm 91. As they recited, "He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge." Gina convulsed, spewing words and tongues, mix of Latin and Creole, cursing the holy names. The statue in Isabella's hand grew hot, scorching her palm, and she dropped it, shattering it further. From the fragments, a whisper escaped. Minga's voice, promising more pain if they resisted. This phase, the initial infiltration, wore them down, making them question everything: sanity, faith, even each other. Sophia's aggression escalated. She'd wake with scratches on her arms, self-inflicted in sleep. Isabella's headaches worsened, visions of Victor's burning form flashing behind her eyes. Carlos clung to his job, swinging hammers on construction sites, but his mind was elsewhere, praying for deliverance. Yet, amid the darkness, glimmers of hope emerged. A parishioner at their local church suggested consulting a priest experienced in spiritual matters. Carlos hesitated. Exorcism sounded like something from movies, but the signs were undeniable. The demons were embedding deeper, their histories unfolding like a macabre tapestry, revealing how they'd hopped from victim to victim across centuries, always leaving ruin. As an exorcist who's performed over 40 rites authorized by the church and trained in Rome, I can tell you this: recognition is the first step. The Morales family was on the brink, the subtle signs giving way to outright horror. But God's timing is perfect. Intervention was coming, though not without cost. The escalation built tension like a storm gathering over the Atlantic. Gina began sleepwalking, ending up in the living room, staring at the spot where Victor died, muttering about buried secrets. Sophia, influenced further, hid the incidents from her parents, feeling a strange compulsion to protect the visitors as she started calling them in her journal. Isabella, racked with guilt over the statue, confessed to Carlos, leading to their first real confrontation with the supernatural. They burned the fragments in the backyard, but the smoke twisted into faces, leering back at them. That night, the whispers targeted the whole family. Zion roaring challenges, Minga cooing temptations of release through harm. It was clear now this wasn't medical, it was spiritual warfare. The demons had infiltrated, but the battle was just beginning. Faith would be tested, and secrets deeper than Victor's grave would surface. By mid-1991, The shadows in that Olive Avenue apartment had thickened into something palpable, a heaviness that pressed on the chest like humid Florida air before a hurricane. The Morales family, once holding on by threads of routine and prayer, found themselves in the eye of a storm that no weather report could predict. Gina's condition spiraled from whispers and fits into outright defiance of natural laws, the kind of manifestations that shake even the most steadfast believers. It started with the levitation, yes, you heard that right. One sweltering afternoon, while Isabella was in the kitchen chopping onions for a simple stew, she heard a thud from the girl's bedroom. Rushing in, she found Gina hovering a foot off the bed, her body arched unnaturally, eyes wide but unseeing, like a puppet suspended by invisible strings. Isabella screamed, crossing herself repeatedly, and Carlos burst in from the living room, his work boots leaving mud tracks on the floor. He grabbed Gina's ankles, pulling her down with all his strength, but she resisted, her limbs rigid as iron. When she finally collapsed, gasping, her skin was clammy, marked with fresh scratches that welled up blood, as if clawed from the inside out. These weren't random marks. They formed patterns, crude symbols echoing those from the walls, symbols of binding and revenge that Zion and Minga had etched into Victor's rituals years before. Gina, in her lucid moments, would sob, describing how the demons forced her to tear at her own flesh, whispering that pain was the price for their presence. The family bandaged her up as best they could, using gauze from the bathroom cabinet, but the wounds reopened nightly, oozing a blackish fluid that stank of decay. Doctors at Miami Children's, on their third visit now, shook their heads, suggesting deeper psychiatric evaluation, perhaps admission to a ward. But Carlos refused, his gut telling him this was beyond medicine. Sophia, witnessing these horrors up close, cracked under the strain. The protective sister, who once laughed off the oddities, now carried her own scars. Late one night, after Gina's latest episode, Sophia locked herself in the bathroom, staring into the shattered mirror. Minga's influence, that sly feminine force, wormed into her thoughts, turning self-doubt into self-destruction. She grabbed a kitchen knife, the same one used for peeling plantains, and sliced deliberate lines across her forearm, deep enough to hit muscle. Blood dripped into the sink, swirling down the drain, and she watched it with a detached fascination, as if compelled by an audience only she could hear. Isabella found her, pale and swaying, and rushed her to the emergency room. The doctors there, at a local clinic off the interstate, stitched 15 neat sutures, asking questions about abuse or depression. Sophia mumbled excuses about an accident, but her eyes betrayed the lie glaze, as if something else peered out. Carlos, watching his daughters unravel, hit rock bottom. His construction job suffered. He'd show up late, distracted, swinging his hammer with half-hearted effort, his mind replaying the nightmares at home. Bills piled up on the kitchen table, unopened envelopes from the electric company threatening shutoff. Isabella, hobbling on a sprained ankle from a recent fall, tripped by an unseen force in the hallway, clung to her rosary like a lifeline. Their marriage strained, arguments flaring over small things, but underneath was a shared terror. What if this evil claimed them all? In desperation, Carlos reached out to the church. He confided in their parish priest during confession, describing the events in halting English mixed with Spanish. The priest, sensing the gravity, referred him to experts. That's when Father James Labar entered the picture, a seasoned exorcist from New York in his 50s. With a background at the Hudson River Psychiatric Center, where he'd seen the blurred lines between mental illness and spiritual oppression, Labar had been involved in dozens of cases, authorized by the church to investigate possessions. Joining him was another priest from the Palm Beach Diocese, whom we'll call Father A for anonymity, a local with deep roots in the community, quiet but resolute. Under the approval of Bishop J. Keith Simons, they began a thorough investigation lasting 6 long months. This wasn't rushed. The church is cautious, demanding evidence to rule out natural causes. They interviewed the family separately in the stuffy parish office scented with incense and old books. Gina, Trembling, recounted the voice's tales. Sophia admitted her urges. Isabella confessed her role with the statue. Carlos provided details of the apartment's history, pieced together from neighbors' whispers about Victor's fiery end. As they delved deeper, Lampert shared insights from Vatican archives, documents I'd later read myself in my training. Zion wasn't just folklore. Church records classified it as a demon of vengeance, linked to historical upheavals like the Haitian revolts, where it masqueraded as a liberator but fed on bloodshed. Minga, its counterpart, was documented as a deceiver of the vulnerable, instigating waves of suicides in colonial Latin America, her name whispered in exorcisms across centuries. These entities, fallen angels at their core, thrived on division, turning families into battlegrounds. While the investigation dragged on phone calls to Rome, psychological evaluations, the evil didn't wait. It escalated with vicious intent. One evening, as Isabella climbed the stairs with a load of laundry, Minga struck through Gina. From the top landing, Gina, or what possessed her, lunged, shoving her mother with inhuman force. Isabella tumbled down the steps, a sickening crack echoing as her leg bent wrong. She hit the bottom with a thud, head slamming against the banister, blood matting her hair. Carlos, hearing the crash, raced in from the garage, finding her unconscious. Gina standing above with a blank stare. Paramedics rushed her to Miami Children's, diagnosing a fractured femur and severe concussion, keeping her overnight in a sterile room beeping with monitors. Sophia, twisted further by the demon's grip, became a pawn in the chaos. Visiting her mother in the hospital, she smuggled in a kitchen knife hidden in her purse. Minga's whispers urged her, end the suffering, strike the weak. In a haze, Sophia approached Isabella's bed, raising the blade with tears streaming. This will set us free, she muttered. But Carlos, ever vigilant, had followed his instincts and arrived just in time. He tackled Sophia, the knife grazing his shoulder, slicing deep into muscle. Blood soaked his shirt, warm and sticky, as he wrestled the weapon away. Nurses burst in at the commotion, restraining Sophia, who snapped out of it moments later, horrified at her actions. Carlos needed stitches himself, a jagged wound that throbbed for weeks, a physical reminder of the spiritual war. The family's despair peaked in those days. Sleepless nights filled with Gina's howls, Sophia's muffled cries from her room, Isabella bedridden and praying through pain. Carlos knelt alone in the living room, Bible open, begging for strength. Why us, Lord? He'd whisper, tears blurring the pages. But in that brokenness, faith flickered brighter. Neighbors, sensing the turmoil, brought meals, cassava, and empanadas, and offered prayers. A quiet network of support in the immigrant community. Lampert and Father A, reviewing the evidence, confirmed it. True demonic possession, not psychosis. They cited the levitations, the knowledge of hidden sins like Victor's rituals that Gina couldn't know, the aversion to holy objects. When they sprinkled holy water during a visit, Gina recoiled, skin blistering as if burned. The priest prepared for the rite, gathering relics, a crucifix blessed by the Pope, vials of exorcised salt. In my own ministry, as the exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis since 2005, I've faced similar escalations. Demons ramp up when cornered, revealing more of their nature to instill fear. Zion boasted through Gina of its ancient origins, a fallen angel who incited Cain's jealousy, now cloaked in slave lore. Minga confessed, manipulating Eve's doubt, now targeting mothers and daughters. These revelations, pieced from sessions, built a fuller picture. The demons had latched onto the apartment's residue, using the family's vulnerabilities. Isabella's past abuse, Gina's shyness, Sophia's protectiveness as entry points. Yet, amid the horror, goodness intervened. A volunteer nurse at the hospital, moved by Isabella's faith, connected them with a support group for spiritual afflictions. Carlos found solace in daily mass, his calloused hands clasped in petition. The priest's involvement brought structure, weekly blessings, fasting instructions reminding the family they weren't alone. As the approval for the exorcism came through, tension mounted. Strange occurrences plagued the investigators. Labar's car stalling en route, Father A's dreams haunted by burning figures. But they pressed on, armed with Christ's authority. The stage was set for confrontation, though the cost would be steep, testing the limits of human endurance. This phase of escalation stripped away illusions, forcing the Moralises to confront evil's depth. But it also highlighted resilience, the quiet power of prayer, the unyielding love binding them. Secrets unraveled further. During one interview, Gina revealed in Zion's voice, bodies buried under the floor Victor's victims, a detail that would later shock authorities. Faith, though battered, held the line, paving the way for the ultimate battle. The rite of exorcism began in April of 1991, not in some dimly lit church basement like you might imagine from stories, but right there in a sterile room at Miami Children's Hospital, where Gina had been admitted for observation. The air was thick with a scent of antiseptic, beeping monitors, providing a mundane backdrop to what was about to unfold, a direct confrontation with forces that defy our earthly understanding. Father Labar and Father A, clad in their cassocks with stoles draped over their shoulders, stood ready, supported by Dr. Warren Schlanger, a psychiatrist of good faith who believed in bridging science and spirituality. He'd seen enough unexplained cases in his career to lend his expertise without skepticism. They'd secured the room with permission from the hospital administration, drawing curtains to shield from prying eyes. Gina was strapped gently to the bed for her safety, her frail body already marked by the ordeal, pale skin, sunken eyes that flickered between her own innocence and something ancient and malevolent. Carlos and Isabella were present, though Isabella watched from a wheelchair, her legs still in a cast from the fall. Sophia hovered nearby, her stitched arm a reminder of her own brushes with the darkness. The priest began with the preliminaries, sprinkling holy water around the perimeter, invoking the saints, and reading from the Roman ritual, that time-tested guide for such battles. As Father Labar intoned the opening prayers in the name of Jesus Christ, our God and Lord, Gina's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her body writhed against the restraints, not in pain, but in defiance, muscles contorting in ways that strained human anatomy. A low growl emanated from her throat, building to a roar that echoed off the tiled walls, drowning out the monitor's beeps. It was Zion's voice, deep and thunderous, cursing in a blend of languages, Latin, profanities mixed with Creole snarls. "You fools dare challenge us?" it bellowed, spittle flying from Gina's lips. The room grew colder, breath visible in puffs, as if the air conditioning had cranked to Arctic levels without warning. Father A held aloft a crucifix, pressing it toward Gina's forehead. She or they recoiled, skin sizzling faintly where droplets of holy water had landed earlier. That's when the revelations poured forth, the demons compelled to speak truth amid their rage. Zion, through Gina's twisted mouth, confessed its fall from grace. Once an angel in the heavenly host, it rebelled with Lucifer, cast down for pride, then cloaked itself in human histories like the Haitian slave uprisings to mask its infernal origins. I was there when the whips cracked, it snarled, fanning flames of hatred that consumed souls by the thousands. Minga followed, her voice shifting to a higher, mocking lilt. Born of the same rebellion, she delighted in perverting femininity, whispering to Eve in the garden, later embodying burned witches in colonial fires, her essence fueling despair across epochs. The first session lasted hours, exhausting everyone. The demons fought back physically, objects levitating and hurling across the room. A metal tray clanging against Father A's head, drawing blood that trickled down his brow, requiring quick bandages from Dr. Schlanger. Gina barked like a feral dog, then babbled in nonsensical tongues, Sankadali and Buga phrases that Labar later traced to obscure African dialects meaning curses of binding. Carlos, unable to stand idle, stepped forward to hold his daughter's hand, but an invisible force shoved him back, cracking a rib with a sharp pop. He gasped, clutching his side, yet refused to leave, his faith a quiet anchor amid the storm. As the prayers intensified, I command you, unclean spirits, to depart. Minga, sensing weakness, dropped a bombshell to sow doubt. Through Gina's foaming lips, she hissed, "Search beneath the floor where Victor burned. He buried his secrets there, 2 bodies, rivals he slew to feed us." The room fell silent for a beat, the implication hanging heavy. Labar noted it down, undeterred, but it planted seeds of horror. Was the apartment built on literal graves? Later, police would verify this, digging up skeletal remains under the living room boards, confirming murders tied to Victor's drug wars. But in that moment, it was a tactic to distract, to erode the priest's resolve. The second session, the next day, pushed boundaries further. Gina's body contorted into impossible positions, back arched to near breaking, head twisting unnaturally. The stench intensified, a putrid mix of sulfur and rot filling the air, making eyes water and stomachs churn. Zion raged against the invocations, revealing more. Its role in biblical plagues, inciting Pharaoh's stubbornness, now reveling in modern chaos like gang violence in the streets of Miami. Minga countered with tales of manipulating saints' temptations, her whispers behind Judas's betrayal, adapted to torment families like the Moralises. Tragedy struck at the peak of resistance. Sophia, who had been allowed in to support her sister, suddenly glazed over Minga's hold, resurfacing. In a blur, she grabbed a scalpel from Dr. Schlanger's nearby kit, lunging forward with a feral cry. "And this," she screamed, plunging the blade into Schlanger's abdomen. He staggered back, blood blooming on his coat, collapsing as nurses rushed in from the hall. Despite emergency surgery in the adjacent operating room, he succumbed hours later, his organs too damaged. The loss hit hard a good man, dedicated to healing, cut down in the crossfire of spiritual warfare. Sophia, snapping out of it, collapsed in sobs, restrained by hospital security. Carlos, nursing his cracked rib, wept openly but urged the priests on. "For my girls," he pleaded through gritted teeth. Labar, drawing on his experience from New York cases, redoubled the efforts, chanting litanies with unyielding voice. Father A, bandaged but steadfast, sprinkled more holy water, the sizzles like bacon on a griddle. The demons weakened, their boasts turning to pleas, then admissions. We yield to the Nazarene. After 2 grueling days, with the family and priests strained to their cores, Zion and Minga fled. Gina slumped, exhausted but free, her eyes clearing for the first time in months. Yet freedom came at a steep price. Gina, though liberated, carried invisible wounds, nightmares that persisted, requiring lifelong antipsychotic meds to quiet the echoes. The trauma rewired her, leaving her wary of shadows, her once dreamy nature hardened. In my own rites, I've witnessed similar aftermaths. The body heals, but the soul bears scars, needing ongoing pastoral care. This case, detailed in church files I studied during my Rome training in 2006, underscores that evil extracts a toll, even in defeat. The exorcism revealed layers of the demon's deceit. Their backstories weren't just lore, but veils for timeless malice. Fallen angels, aping human suffering to hide their hatred for God. Labar noted the physical evidence, blisters, temperature drops, as hallmarks of genuine infestation. Father A, recovering from his head wound, emphasized community support. Volunteers from the diocese helped the family relocate temporarily, blessing a new space. But the battle's echoes lingered. Sophia faced legal repercussions for Schlanger's death, though mitigated by expert testimony on possession, a rare courtroom acknowledgement of the supernatural. Carlos's injury healed slowly. His faith deepened, but his trust in the ordinary shattered. Isabella, from her wheelchair, found strength in intercession, later channeling her pain into advocacy. In reflecting on this, as I've done with over 3,000 requests for help in my ministry, I see God's victory. Through Christ's authority, evil retreats. Yet it reminds us vigilance is key. Demons prowl, seeking whom they may devour. This rite wasn't spectacle, it was raw, costly grace in action, unveiling truths that fortify our defenses. As we move to the aftermath, remember, light prevails, but the shadows teach us to cling tighter to the cross. In the wake of that grueling exorcism, the Morales family emerged from the shadows, but not unscathed like survivors of a fierce storm, battered and forever changed by the winds that had torn through their lives. The hospital room, once a battlefield of snarls and prayers, fell silent as Gina's breathing steadied, her eyes fluttering open to the faces of her loved ones. For the first time in months, there was no alien glare behind them, just the weary gaze of a girl who'd been to hell and back. Father Labar and Father A, sweat-soaked and voices hoarse, offered a final blessing, reminding the family that Christ's victory was absolute, even if the scars lingered. But healing, as I've learned through countless cases in my ministry, isn't a clean break. It's a slow mending, threaded with grace and grit. Gina was discharged after a few days of monitoring, her body weak from the ordeal, muscles atrophied from the contortions, skin pale from lack of sun. Doctors prescribed antipsychotics, not for possession now, but to quiet the residual echoes, flashbacks of whispers, phantom scratches that itched in the night. She returned to school eventually, but the shy dreamer was gone, replaced by a cautious young woman who jumped at loud noises and avoided mirrors. Therapy helped sessions where she unpacked the trauma, but faith was her true anchor, attending Mass with Carlos, finding solace in the Eucharist promise of renewal. Sophia's path was darker, shadowed by the blood on her hands. The incident with Dr. Schlanger led to charges manslaughter, argued down for murder thanks to expert witnesses from the church, who testified to the influence of forces beyond her control. It was a landmark moment, rare for courts to entertain the supernatural, but the evidence was compelling. Medical records of her blackouts, Labar's sworn affidavit on demonic manipulation. Still, justice demanded accountability. Sophia spent years in a Florida women's prison, her fiery spirit tempered by regret. Inside those walls, she found a twisted reflection of the evil she'd fought, gangs and despair mirroring Zion's chaos. But redemption flickered. She joined a prison Bible study, channeling her protectiveness into mentoring younger inmates, turning her pain into purpose. Carlos and Isabella's marriage, already strained by the invisible fissures the demons had widened, couldn't withstand the aftermath. By 1993, they separated amicably, if such a word fits heartbreak. The constant reminders, the apartment's lingering chill, Gina's meds on the counter, Sophia's letters from behind bars proved too much. Isabella, with her mended leg but a spirit forever marked, returned to Colombia. There, in the familiar hills of her youth, she transformed her suffering into service. She became an advocate for victims of spiritual afflictions, speaking at church gatherings about the signs of oppression, drawing from her own story to warn others. Evil hides in the ordinary, she'd say, her voice steady now, but God's light exposes it. She collaborated with local priests, helping families spot the subtle invasions before they escalated. A beacon of the goodness that endures. Carlos stayed in Florida, holding down his construction job with calloused hands that now bore a cross tattoo on his forearm, a reminder of the battle won. He visited Sophia regularly, driving hours along the coast, sharing stories of Gina's progress to keep hope alive. The apartment on Olive Avenue, they fled it soon after, but it stood empty for years, a whispered curse among locals. By 1995, the building was condemned and demolished. Bulldozers churning the earth where Victor's secrets had been unearthed, those skeletal remains confirming Minga's taunt, leading to a cold case closure that made headlines. Yet even with the rubble cleared, reports trickled in. Odd lights in the vacant lot, chills felt by passersby suggesting Zion and Minga hadn't vanished entirely, perhaps lingering in wait for another foothold. This account, pieced together from church reports I've studied and discussions with colleagues like Labar before his passing, Also drew from secular sources a segment on ABC's 20/20 that aired in the mid-90s, interviewing the family anonymously. It framed the events as a clash of cultures and beliefs, but for those of us in the trenches, it's clear, a stark illustration of the eternal war between good and evil. Victor embodied human wickedness, inviting darkness through his greed. Zion and Minga, the infernal exploiters, thriving on that invitation. Against them stood the forces of light. Labar's unwavering authority, Father A's quiet resolve, Carlos's paternal faith, Isabella's maternal prayers, even Schlenger's sacrifice highlighted the cost of compassion in this fight. In my role as exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, appointed back in 2005 and having handled thousands of inquiries, I've seen echoes of this case. Families torn, lives rebuilt piecemeal. It teaches that evil doesn't always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it's a whisper, a forgotten relic, a moment of vulnerability. But goodness prevails through Christ, his cross, the ultimate weapon, his church, the fortress. Yet the story warns us. Demons like Zion and Minga prowl still, as reports from that Florida site persisted into the 2000s and beyond. Faint anomalies captured by investigators' cold spots, EVP recordings of archaic Spanish murmurs. By 2010, paranormal teams documented activity in the redevelopment area, electronics failing, shadows moving against logic. It underscores that exorcism seals one breach, but the world remains a battlefield. For the Moralises, the legacy was bittersweet, scattered, but stronger in faith. Gina, in her adulthood, shared her testimony in private church circles, a living witness to deliverance. Sophia, paroled eventually, pursued counseling, helping others navigate trauma. Carlos aged with quiet dignity, his prayers a daily shield. As I wrap this tale, drawn from those authentic sources, remember, this isn't fiction to chill the spine, but a call to vigilance. In our modern world, with its distractions and doubts, evil adapts, slipping through screens, doubts, divisions, but so does grace, abundant and unyielding. Cling to your faith, seek the sacraments, surround yourself with the faithful, for in the end, as Scripture promises, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. If this story stirs something in you, turn to prayer, not fear. God is greater. Thank you for listening. May it strengthen your walk with Christ.